draft. Thank you for joining us today. I think the Steelers crushed it, Shane. I really do. I mean, it's hard to say that I don't know how we could describe this. I think everything went as well as it possibly could have. I put out a few days before the draft, I put out my dream scenario for the Steelers. Yeah. And it included them getting Broderick Jones in the first round, Darnell Washington in the second round, who I loved, Emmanuel Forbes, and a few other guys. They somehow beat my dream scenario, and I'm not sure how that was possible, but they made it work. And so I'm thrilled with the results. We're going to break down each selection that we have here. We're going to talk about each pick. We're going to give our grades for each player. We'll do that in just a minute. First, Shane, let's talk about some of the things happening real quickly. Steelers draft grades. I mean, I feel like everybody is giving them the A or A plus this year. There's a few B's, B pluses in there that I saw. I think B plus was the lowest grade that I saw somebody hand the Steelers, which I feel like is almost a little bit unreasonable considering the haul that they were able to get in the draft. Ryan Wilson of CBS Sports, he recently ranked all 32 NFL teams. He had the Steelers number 1 in terms of draft grades. And so how do you feel that turned out for them? And what are your thoughts on the draft grades that were handed out?
I think on paper, right? Because I want to preface this because people tend to say like draft grades right after draft are dumb, and they kind of are, right? They're kind of nonsensical because we don't know anything about any of the players technically yet until they actually play in the NFL.
Yeah,
but we're basing it off of, at least in the analyst case, like their pre-draft rankings on players, what they thought about them. So they're just an exercise, and like based on my evaluation, this is how the Steelers did. And across the board, like you said, Tommy, people love the draft, and they should. You look at the value. Not only do you get valuable positions with really all of your picks for the most part, right? You also get players who, consensus-wise at least, by across the board, rather ranked higher than where they were taken or in that range, right? Broderick Jones, some lower, some had him higher, but he was the best offensive tackle left on the board when they were drafting. They moved up to get him. Joey Porter Jr., no one had him coming out of the first round. At least nobody that I saw had him exiting the first round. There's just too many traits there to work with. You get him at the top of the second. I was higher on Keanu Benton than a lot of people were, and even 49, again, still great value by most people's metrics. And then you get Darnell Washington at 93. Like, what I understand, like, there's some medical stuff with him possibly or whatever else. A lot of people seem to think that it's really not that big of a deal. Like, he is a bigger, lankier, shouldn't say lanky, he's 270, but a bigger guy. He has the potential to have his legs taken out from under him. I understand all that. This guy's a freak. He just is. Like, you can't justify not taking him at 93. The fact that nobody was willing to take a chance on him until 93 is still crazy to me, regardless of whatever the knee, what situation might be. And yeah, if he plays 6 or 7 years, he was a third-round pick. So it doesn't matter. Like, if you get 5 or 6 good years out of him, that's still worth a third pick, especially if he's as good as we think he could be during that time period. You get Nick Herbig somehow later in the draft too in the 4th round. Like, somehow that is pulled off. Even teams that, like, I feel like maybe didn't view him as like an edge, or maybe was going to convert him to off-ball linebacker, which I'm hoping the Steelers don't. Actually, I think he can play edge, but even teams like that, he's worth the gamble with his traits to do that earlier than the late 4th round. And then you just top it off. You get Corey Trice, who probably by most people, at least, I had him as, I think, as corner 10, somewhere around there. He falls all the way 7th round because, again, medical concerns. Hopefully, they're probably bigger concerns, obviously, because he fell farther than even Washington did. But you get him in the 7th. Like, just steals, like, constantly down the board, just premium positions and players who were generally ranked higher than where they were taken.
Yeah, it's so hard to complain about anything that inspired during that draft because it just flowed so beautifully for the Steelers. Real quick, here's jersey numbers just came in today for the Steelers rookie class. Broderick Jones said he's going to be wearing number 77. He said that a few days back to honor his teammate that passed away in a car accident. Ike Taylor dropped the news that Joey Porter Jr. is going to be wearing 24 to honor Uncle Ike there. Nice. It'll be kind of fun to see him in that. Keanu Benton's going to be wearing 95, number 95, which you wore at Wisconsin. I really wanted to see Darnell Washington.
I know that's the disappointing one to me because all the other ones I'm fine. Like, obviously 77, Broderick, he's doing it for his teammate. That's awesome. Ike getting his number worn again by our biggest really draft pick at corner that we think at least will be good. We had Burns a couple years ago, but whatever. But Washington not getting 0 does hurt me a little bit. And the Steelers they're the way they are about stuff, like whatever. But that would have been so cool to see him wear 0.
It's so
against the
fitting
Colts.
too, because it's
Yeah.
0 for like, there are 0 other players that are built like
Yeah,
me.
exactly. Yeah,
So
it's perfect.
that's
Yeah, it's awesome.
and I would have loved for him to be able to be the first kind of to go that route
Yeah.
with the new jersey number rule. But
Right.
Darnell Washington instead will be wearing number 80, which I'm sure he'll rock it just fine.
Oh yeah, he'll be
Nick
fine.
Herbick's going to be wearing number 51.
Mhm.
Corey Trice will be wearing number 27, and Spencer Anderson will be wearing number 74. So there are your rookie jersey numbers.
Yep.
Let's talk about the undrafted free agent pickups here real quick, and then we're going to dive into each selection here. If we do a little bit deeper dive. Steelers undrafted free agents they signed shortly after the draft didn't get really any top priority guys. They
No.
really aren't. I
It's
mean,
not what
they
do
don't go too
usually.
deep into that. They don't. They're not willing to throw as much guaranteed money out there, it seems. And so, what we have right now is quarterback Tanner Morgan from Minnesota, running back Jordan Byrd from San Diego State, fullback Monty Pottenbaum from Iowa, edge defender David Perales from Fresno State, defensive lineman James Ninja.
Something
How do
like
you say
that.
that name?
I'm not. I'm gonna say Nehemiah or something like that.
Nehemiah.
Yeah.
That sounds easier. From Merrimack College, and kicker BT Potter from Clemson. So nothing that jumps off the page here. Not one of those guys that's like, oh, how did this person fall out of the draft? Nothing like that. I feel like there's a couple names on there we'll talk about later on as guys that could potentially make the team, but there is your list. All right. If you have a question for us, please drop it in the chat. We would love to be able to answer your Steelers or draft or roster related questions at this point. This is where things get really fun. We super enjoyed the last couple months. And for those who followed along the show, thank you for following along with us as we gave our draft takes.
Yes.
Now the real excitement starts because Shane, I think the Steelers crushed it. Later on in the show, we're going to talk about this is the best draft the Steelers have had since blank. We're going to fill in the blank. And again, this is just on paper. Things can happen. Injuries can occur. But I love what the Steelers did here. So let's go one pick at a time, Shane. We're going to break down this whole draft class and kind of give some detail on these players here. Let's start with Broderick Jones. And Shane, do you want to kick off your thoughts on Steelers taking Broderick Jones and where they got him at pick 14 after a slight trade up?
Well, first, we talked about draft grades. I'm going to go ahead and give this pick an A. It's pretty much the highest I'm willing to do. I don't do the A pluses or minuses, just A, B, whatever. But this is an A. You get the best tackle that's left on the board. Luckily for us, even though I don't dislike Darnell Wright, he goes ahead of Broderick Jones at 10 to the Bears. Gives us the opportunity to move up to go get Broderick Jones, only giving up our 4th round pick, which we were able to recoup back basically later on anyway. We'll get to that. But getting him here at 14, one, it's really good value for a player that's as talented as he is. He's not a finished product, but I think he has the most potential probably out of all these left tackles. Paris Johnson Jr. is a great player now, and he might be an even better player later on. But I think they're in the same tier of player in this class because of that upside with Broderick. So great pick, small move up to get him. He didn't have to go up to 9 or some of the other trades we were hearing about pre-draft, which is great. And again, it attacks a position where, again, until he was selected, they hadn't selected an offensive tackle while I was alive. Like, it just didn't. I mean, not trying to make myself seem too. I'm still 26. Like 26 years is a long time. Like that is a long time not to draft one of the most premium positions in the sport in the first round. So them doing that already kind of gets an A for me. Like some of the other tackles would have been less, good in my opinion, but would have still been a solid pick. Getting him at 14 is definitely good value.
Well, Shane, I definitely was alive and well, and I was kind of a kid running around playing a little football of my own, just backyard. But it's been forever. It's been far too long. In a league that is like a 65% passing league, I cannot believe that the Steelers hadn't addressed the offensive tackle position in the first round since Jermaine Stevens in 1996 until this point right now. I mean, it was long overdue. I'm very pleased with the prospect that they got. Broderick was a guy I was high on all along. I had him touching Paris Johnson on my draft board, and I watched a lot of film. I mean, 2 or 3 times a week, we'd sit down for a couple hours and we would pound out some all 22 film. And so I like what I see. There are a lot of things to work on mechanically for Broderick Jones. He's far from a finished prospect that way, and it makes sense. He only has 1 full year of starting experience. But he did sit behind Andrew Thomas, Jamari Salyer there at Georgia. And so there's a reason why he wasn't on the football field.
Exactly.
But as far as mechanics go, does a lot of lunging, puts his head forward, can get unbalanced at times. But my goodness, the athleticism that you see on film is so outstanding that even with downright horrific mechanics at time and technique, he can still recover because the speed and foot quickness is so good. And so I love the potential of this kid. I think that the sky's the limit for him. I think that he could be one of the best pass protectors in the NFL if all goes well. A lot of that's going to depend on how much progress he makes over the first couple of years of his career, what Pat Meyer's able to do, kind of a moldable ball of clay there, if you will. I did have Paris Johnson one spot higher on my board because I thought that Johnson had more position flex and just obviously prototype size and traits for him and too with the 36 plus inch arms. However, I did say throughout the process, I actually like Broderick better for the Steelers because the Steelers, you don't need to move him anywhere. I want him playing at left tackle. And I think the upside is so immense that I think that he could potentially be better than what Paris Johnson could be in the NFL, specifically as a pass protector, where he graded out better in true pass sets and in pass blocking grades, because I think the quickness is still, it's a notch higher than even what Paris Johnson offers in that regard. So I love this selection. He was 12th overall on my board. The Steelers, I got him at 14. So even with the trade up, I had it as a good value pick. Yep. I am giving this one an A as well. I'm with you, Shane. And again, I have given out a couple A pluses, very, very few and far between. Like I don't remember my previous grades, but like TJ Watt would have been an A plus. I had him like 12th.
I mean, the value there was pretty 30th. Crazy, yeah.
Yeah. And so I give them out very rarely, but I do have a couple in this class. Broderick's not one of them. We'll get to the rest of these real soon. But the value was just fantastic at some of these picks that I couldn't help but do it. And so the only reason I'm not here, I love Broderick as a prospect. I don't think he's an elite level prospect. I had a 1-2 grade on him. Very few true number ones to me in this year's class.
Yeah, not a lot of those
but the Steelers get one of my top 1-2 grades, and it comes at a premium position with the Steelers have not touched, and a guy with elite upside. I mean, Broderick Jones tested as a 96.8 percentile athlete or something crazy like that. So I love the selection. Comes at a premium position, given an A. Let's go to Joey Porter Jr. at pick 17. I'm sorry, pick 32.
Right, you think 17.
This is a player. This is a player that we were.
There?
The most frequently mocked player, Shane, to the Steelers at pick 17 throughout the pre-draft process.
Understandably so.
Ironically, Broderick Jones was number 2. They got both of them, and they were both mocked to the Steelers very often. And I've done it in the past as well at pick 17 there. I don't think a lot of people saw Joey Porter falling out of the first round. Say what you will about his ball production. Only had the 1 pick in 4 years, but it's really hard to come by gritty, scrappy, 6'2.5" corners with 34-inch arms to just play the football well in the air in terms of getting the hands on the ball, coming up and supporting the run. I like the pick. I want to see what you have to say about it.
So the thing I think is interesting about Joey falling, I think part of it is because he is kind of a unique build, right? Some teams just I don't think value him because they might run a lot of zone covers. They might not think he can handle that as well. You know, they might not run a lot of the press man stuff that he's going to be asked to do with the Steelers. So I think it's specifically a great fit with Pittsburgh, more so than maybe some other teams. Like at Washington 16, for example, he was mocked there a lot. I didn't really see that as making a lot of sense just because, again, they're going to run a lot of off coverage. They're going to run a lot of that stuff. Not that he can't do that, but it's not what he would be best at doing in the NFL. So him falling still surprised me this far. I thought some team would go. I honestly thought the Vikings would take him at 23. Flores is coming there as the defensive coordinator now. Like he needs those long press man corners. He didn't get one, which is interesting. But for me, this is just huge value, right? He was one of my 15 best players in the class for me. Getting him at 32, regardless of the fact, again, maybe he isn't the most flexible in terms of scheme. It doesn't really matter for us because we're going to ask him to do the things that he does well. And you talked about the length. It's crazy to me that a guy can have that amount of length at corner and just not be drafted high, right? Because it's so valuable to be able to have your hands on a receiver almost no matter how much separation they get from you. I mean, he'll be able to touch guys on the back of the sholdder when they're 5 yards away from him. Like, it's really rare to see that skill set. And I think he's going to be great for us. Getting him a 32. If I did give A pluses, this would be an A plus. I mean, the value, the fit. He's, obviously the legacy stuff. This is what the Steelers do. Somehow they let them get away with it. I don't really know how they keep letting them get away with it. There's another guy that we'll talk about that's sort of in that same mold later on. Like, it's just kind of crazy that the two people that we thought were the two players who are most likely to be selected 17, both are on the team right now.
And Shane, I did give this one an A+.
I know.
And the reason why I did is because I had Joey Porter as my 15th overall player in the draft.
Right.
Steelers get
Yeah.
him at 32. That's pretty impressive value. He was by far the best remaining name
Oh yeah,
that
by
was
far.
available on the board at that time. Like I thought that there was a chance you could get like a Will McDonald or somebody like that falling there. Those guys went higher than I
They
expected them to
did.
go.
Yeah, the
And
edges
I
got
would have
pushed up.
loved, yeah, I would have loved those players to have been available at that spot, but I didn't think Joey Porter was going to be available at 32. And the fact that the Steelers got a player at 32 that they would have considered taking at 17 anyway. Now, what I would say is right before the draft, I posted an article with my dream scenario first round picks for the Steelers, and I listed Joey Porter as 6 on the list. So I wasn't as keen on him in the first round, but getting him at 32, I mean, you couldn't ask for a better situation than that. I was a little bit hopeful that the Steelers would be able to maybe trade back just like 2 or 3 spots, pick up a late round pick,
It's just
and
dangerous.
still get Porter. It just, they weren't willing to risk it. And I don't blame them because, like I said, Porter was by far the highest name on my board. I really, the guys that I really mocked all along, or not necessarily mocked for the Steelers, but the guys that I would have loved to have had available there at 32 were like Will McDonald, Emmanuel Forbes, Darnell Washington is a guy, obviously, we'll talk about him here in a little bit, but we didn't know the extent of the medicals, but he was a guy I liked enough that I would have taken him at that spot. Didn't think Porter would be there. I'm going to give it an A+ for that pick. I don't know how he's ever going to be in terms of ball production, Shane, but the guy has the right attitude. I feel like cornerback is one of those positions you have to have the right attitude and mentality to play that position. He certainly checks that box, and I like the traits that he offers. Boy, does he disrupt passing lanes.
And if he took Ike's number, if he can be as good as Ike Taylor at pick 32, I will take that.
Yeah.
Ike had the same issues where he wasn't going to catch the football. You could throw him 50 balls, he'll catch 2 of them. That's okay. He got his hands on a lot of balls, though. He had a lot of ball production from that perspective. I think Joey can have that type of production, right? Where like maybe he's not coming down with 4 interceptions a year, but he's going to knock a lot of balls away, and he's going to be able to protect the deep part of the field, especially on those bigger routes, because he can sky with those receivers or with the receivers and take the ball away from them. So I have no questions about his fit for sure. So.
Yeah, and ball skills are important. Not going to lie.
And
if that's a part of his game that never develops, then he
It'll
will
limit
be
his
held back
upside
a little bit.
Yeah.
It for sure a little bit, but in the grand scheme of things, that's a few plays out of the entire 1,000 or 1,100 snap season, however much he ends up playing, that he's going to make an impact from play to play with his length and his physicality. I do believe that. I mean, he's going to be a very impactful player, whether that comes in ball production or not. It's worth noting that Ike Taylor had 14 interceptions in 12 years, which is a pretty awful ratio when we really break it down. But still, this was a good football player. I think he goes high in a redraft because he had such an awesome NFL career, and he would be the type of player that even if he's not getting that pick, he could get knocked down, have a bad game, he can come back and hold AJ Green for 2 catches for 12 yards. He's that type of player. So I do think that Porter's going to be similar in a lot of ways that Ike was in terms of the mentality, length, and ability to win down the field against big outside receivers there. Let's go to the third pick here, and that's Steelers taking Keanu Benton at pick 49. This was your guy all along, Shane, so I'll let you go first on this.
Yeah, I mean, again, I try not to give A pluses, so I won't, but it's an A for me. The value for me personally is higher than probably the consensus is on it. But either way, it's a quality selection, regardless of how you kind of had him ranked. We need this position. We need more talented guys in the interior. Just in general, regardless what position they kind of play, whether they're more the nose tackle, 3 tech, 5 whatever it is. And I think he can give you a little bit of everything. I think he's stout enough to play nose early on. I think he'll play some of that this year, especially just because of the depth chart where it's at with nose tackle. But he can play 3 tech. I think that's his best position in the NFL for sure. He can play probably 5 if you really need him to. He's athletic enough to do that. He just gives you a weapon in the middle of the field that we didn't have behind the starters right now. And I think with Cam Hayward there especially, he can help him along to get to the point where maybe he can be, maybe not the same level of player, but close to it, and kind of be the guy that replaces him as the biggest name on that D-line outside of the edge rushers, obviously. So big A for me. Like, one of my favorite players to watch Wisconsin for the last, really couple of years and in general for a while now. And it's worked out in the past. Hey, so I can't say anything about taking Wisconsin guys.
Shane, I've got a B on
Yeah, I
Benton,
know.
and
Yeah.
but I do like your encouragement with this pick. You give me reason to believe that this is going to be a good one, and I'm not down on it by any means. It's just when you compare it to the rest of the class, I did have Benton, I believe 53 on my board. The Steelers took him at 49, so it's not. I mean, it's right on value
Yeah.
for me. I think the biggest thing that we can note here, Shane, is if the Steelers didn't take Benton here, I mean, Jervon Dexter went a few picks later, and then the talent dropped off a cliff
Yes.
at defensive
Yes.
tackle. You would not have gotten one, at least not one that's going to
That
be
you expect
play
to
any
have an
significant
impact.
role
Right.
on the Steelers. Yes. It's interesting to note, Shane, if you look at his stable metrics on Pro Football Focus, Keanu Benton's run stop win rate was only in the 10th percentile, but his pass rush stuff was all really good. I think people, they kind of have the perception the other way around that he was the dominant run defender and he'll develop as a pass rusher. I don't know. And it's just it's just a metric. And so I'm interested to see how he develops. I do think he's a guy that has a good blend of traits in terms of size, length, mobility, ability to get after the quarterback, and potential run stop ability there. So I'm interested to see what the Steelers do for him. Sounds like they're going to plug him in at nose. They've made it work with guys who weren't necessarily big football players. Javon Hargrave was one of them, 6'1", 309, short arms. Benton's certainly bigger and longer than that type of player. And I don't think that Hargrave was ever a great run defender, but he helped
Not really.
disrupt because he was able to knife in the backfield. He was helped to change the direction of a lot of running plays. So I'm interested to see what Benton's going to do. I do think he'll carve out a pretty significant role early on because there's just not a lot of competition to be had there at this point in time, unless maybe Steelers bring back a healthy Chris Wormley, something like that. But I do think that, I mean, it kind of, you slot him right in there. I mean, I see no reason why he wouldn't be able to beat out like Braden Fajoko or something for snaps. If that's Armon Watts. So we'll talk about the roles here in a little bit, but I like the Benton selection. I just don't like it as much as some of the other ones Steelers had because
I can't really, so I can't blame you for that. Like if you're comparing, especially if you're valuing based on the rest of the draft, like this was probably of at least their first 5 picks, maybe the worst value technically, but it's still a good value, which is the funny part about it, right? Like especially for me, it's good value, but even across the league, like he's in that between 55 and 45 range for most guys, which is totally fair. Getting him at 49 when, especially like you said, if you didn't take him here, you weren't getting a guy that was remotely in his range. It just wasn't going to happen. The talent drop off interior defensive line really kind of hit, like you said, right after Dexter went. Even Dexter's got his own issues that hopefully they can address. Like if they can address it, he'll be great, but you know, it's tough. So
yeah. And I had Benton a tier higher than Dexter too, so I wouldn't have been nearly as pleased. I'm glad
not at 40.
If they were to get one of the two, I'm glad that it was Benton for sure. I do think that Steelers media has been maybe talking about a little bit too much as like, oh, this guy is a guy that we should take at 32. I kind of never felt that way about him, but I am encouraged by the potential that he has. And I'm Benton tested as an 89th percentile athlete, even at his size. And so, like I said, good blend of traits. Interesting to see how that works out. The one guy that it stung a little bit to me, Shane, I really liked the potential of Cody Mock as a center. He went one pick, but before the Steelers were on the clock in the second round. I do believe it was one pick, right? Was it?
It was either one or a couple picks because I know he was I think it might have been pick 44 or something like that.
Yeah, it was right before their selection. It was Tampa Bay. It was right before their selection in the second round, and I really liked him as a center prospect for the Steelers. I think he's just going to be a good football player.
My only issue with him, honestly, is just the fact that, like you said, I think his best position as a player is a position he hasn't played. And like ideally, like if you're going to take a guy to play a position he hasn't played, you want to do it as late as you can, just because there's a lot of bust potential there. But I do agree that he's a good football player. I just do wonder where he's going to fit long term with Tampa and really the NFL in general. It'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, and again, definitely not complaining about Benton at all. Like I said, we'll give our total Steelers draft grade here. The guy that I did want, though, that I actually, when this pick came around, I'm like, you need to draft Darnell Washington. So let's talk about Darnell Washington. Steelers got him in a trade back from 80 to 93.
Yeah.
Somehow this guy is still on the board. And I'm just talking about the rarest of rare traits. No, he does not have good college production when it comes to receiving stuff. But my goodness, is he a phenomenal blocker already? And so I think that raises the floor for Washington, assuming that the knee issues don't linger into the NFL. He assures us that the knee is just fine. There's not going to be any problem there. He had it scoped. Other than that, he's like, I don't know what anybody's talking about. I'm good to go. Interestingly, Shane, and then I'll let you go with Washington came in at 6'7" and 3/8 and 272 pounds. This is a huge human being, and it's remarkable the athletic testing that he has. Now, I do think he's a little bit lumbering in his movements, doesn't have a lot of hip fluidity, obviously. And when you're that size, you're just not going to. But the potential of what this guy could be already, I think he's going to step into the NFL as a great blocker. But then the potential as a receiver, when you have a essentially 100th percentile wingspan catch radius, and a guy that you can target over the middle who has soft, natural hands. What do you think of the Washington pick and where Steelers were able to get him?
I think that a lot of the fall is because of the medicals. Obviously, that's what we've been hearing. But I think another part of it is when you look at Darnell Washington, outside of like he is a freak, right? We know that from athletic testing, everything else. But he
Yeah.
is 100% a throwback tight end. This is not the modern tight end that we see, and that's not a bad thing, especially because we have the modern tight end already on the roster. But I think part of the problem, a lot of teams are seeing like we're trying to think like, can this guy be a tight end one in the modern NFL? And I think that is a question
Mhm.
mark, but he doesn't have to be with us, especially. I think for a lot of teams, you draft him not to be your prototypical tight end. When you draft him to be the guy that teams aren't prepared to deal with anymore. Linebackers
Yeah.
can't cover him because how are you going to keep him from catching the football? Like, I don't know how the linebacker can do it. I legitimately don't. And whenever he does get on the run, yeah, he's a little bit lumbering, but when you get him in open space and he destroys people. I mean, how
Mhm.
you supposed to? I mean, you go low, but like, how are you supposed to tackle 6'7", 270-pound tight end that's running 4.6 40 basically down the sideline? Like, it's just hard, right? And he's going to be unique in the way that you use him, and I think that's part of why again he may have fallen a little bit because I think some teams weren't 100% sure how to use them within their offense. But with the Steelers, it's very clear. Pat is the move tight end. He is the guy
Yep.
that you get out in space. You allow him to run routes in the middle of the field, down the seam, all that good stuff. He is the pass catcher in the offense. Washington is the guy that makes everybody else just not even want to get out of bed in the morning they play the Steelers. Like that's what his job is, right? And if he can do that well, especially as a rookie and moving forward, he might only catch 15, 20 balls this year. He might
Mhm.
only have 2 or 3 touchdowns. He might only do this or that. His impact in the blocking game, especially even on pass sets too, because he can pass block very well too. He can help defend the edge, especially too. Especially you put him on the same size as Broderick Jones. Let those two work off each other. They're already used to that. Like there's a lot of ways you can use him effectively as a rookie, and then you hope that he can develop into more of a pass catcher. Obviously, add another element to the offense, but he doesn't even have to become a great pass catcher to have a really solid role in this team. And the third round pick, it's just too much value, even if you had concerns about the
Mhm.
knee.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it is important to temper expectations in terms
Yes,
of what he's going to
especially
offer
production,
as
especially.
yes, production wise, especially early on in his career with Pat being there. And we know that if it runs through a tight end, it's going to run through him.
Yes.
I do love the upside though here. And what I'm saying by that, he is taller, longer, heavier, and more athletic than Gronkowski coming out testing wise. Now, I
Testing
don't
wise.
think that he moves
No,
like the athlete,
but
obviously,
still,
that
yeah.
Gronk did. But this just shows how rare of a body type and athlete you are getting with this player. He tested as a 98.8 percentile athlete, according to his relative athletic score. And the traits are just exceptionally rare. And like I said, when you are as good of a blocker as you are, I think the ceiling is already so high for you because even if you come into the NFL and you're like Josh Oliver and you're just a really good blocker at the tight end position, but the potential as a receiver is all there because you have natural hands and you catch everything that's thrown to you essentially. I just love what this pick could potentially be. I think it's one of those prototype picks that you look for in these rounds that is a high floor, high ceiling potential type prospect. Pete Prisco threw this out there, Shane. He thinks that Darnell Washington, that the Steelers should try to convert him to be a left tackle. The Steelers just drafted one of those guys.
Yeah.
I get the intrigue. I honestly do this. Pittsburgh's not going to do this,
No,
but
but
I talk about it for real quick. I get the intrigue here because you just don't find guys. He's got like a Lane Johnson body type,
he
and
does
the guy
kind
puts
of,
on
yeah.
some weight. I have no doubt that he could do it if the Steelers tried to make him into that. It would be probably a 2-year transition to get big enough and
Yes,
strong enough
yes,
for
yes.
that. I do think he plays with tremendous strength. You saw him like moving those sleds and just on
He looked
film, there's
different than everybody else.
he does. It was one of the best I've seen in that particular drill, but even just watching his Georgia tape, he just seems like an immovable guy. Can you imagine Broderick and him out in space together, just just grading roads together. And so
It's gonna be crazy. It's gonna
it's so fun
happen
to think
sometime this
about.
year. It is,
Yeah,
yeah.
and honestly, I feel like Steeler fans are generally going to they're going to be wanting 12 personnel over 11
Yes,
personnel because you're going to want you're going to want, you're going to want Darnell Washington on the field over Allen Robinson, I'm sure,
I would say,
most of the
yeah,
time. And so I'm super interested to see how this is going to turn out. I had Darnell Washington as my 19th overall player this
yeah,
year, and I
I
didn't
know.
factor a lot of the injury stuff in because we didn't
We just
know the
didn't
extent
know,
of the
yeah. We
medicals.
just didn't know.
But I think that he was that talented that I had him. I had him right there with Kincaid as the top tight end this year because I think the package that you are getting is so exceptionally rare. Like I said,
Yeah,
my comparison for him all along has been Mercedes Lewis, very popular one.
yeah,
Mercedes Lewis is running on a 16-year NFL career because he is
yeah,
such a good blocker. If he develops into a better receiver, then he could be a better player than that,
yeah.
and that's what
I
could make him so
was I
special.
was struggling to find a comp for him because, like I said, Mercedes Lewis makes a lot of sense.
Mhm.
My favorite one that I kind of came up with near the end was I was looking over at division rival Nick Boyle with Soldier Serum
Okay.
is pretty much what I kind of think.
Yeah.
Like he does everything that he does, but he's 10 times the athlete and bigger, stronger, fat. Like it's that type of player, and he got a good contract from that team to be that player. Like
Yeah.
this is a guy that if he's just a better version of that and actually has some receiving upside, you're going to get a long-term player here and one that probably you can afford to keep around for a long time because he's not going to probably produce at the level with receiving talent to be given, a 15, 16, $17 million contract. So hopefully
Yeah.
we can keep him around here for a long time too.
Yep. Needless to say, I gave that one an A plus. Love that selection. I would have been comfortable if the medicals were clean, and we didn't know obviously much about that going in.
Yeah.
I would have been comfortable taking him at 32. I know
Yeah.
that was kind of a hot take to some people who said, "Well, that's such a luxury pick." I think you were getting a prototype Y tight end. Like I don't
Yes.
think that you couldn't build him from scratch any
No.
better than what
You
Darnell
could no, you
Washington
could not.
is for that role. And so I'm super excited to see how he's going to be used in that
Yeah.
offense.
And I gave it an A as
Uh
well. So.
Yes. So let's go to the next one here. Nick Herbig, call him an edge, call him a linebacker. Steelers are going to try him at outside linebacker. They said, we don't know exactly what his role is going to look like at this point in time. I've got an idea of what it could be. Um, I like this pick a lot. Now, where I didn't like it, Shane, was when people were talking about it originally at pick 80. I'm like, that's a little bit rich for me. I love the film. I mean, the guy is outstanding ball production in the Big Ten. Has some great wins off the edge. I like him, what he offers as a pass rusher. It's just when you project forward, I don't think that you're getting the same player probably that in college. You just have to you have to consider the jump in competition when you're going to go against those NFL tackles, and you got to consider the size restrictions there. You being a Wisconsin guy, Shane, I'm really interested to hear what you have to say about Herbig. Do you think this was a great value pick for the Steelers? Where would you have taken him if you had your choice anywhere? Where do you think this guy should have gone?
So, me personally, because and I'll start with this before I get into where I would have taken him. I think his floor as a pass rusher is very high because he's very intelligent as a rusher. He understands who he is
Yeah.
as a player and he uses his athletic gifts to his most potential, right? He does everything you need to do to win as a smaller edge, and he showed it in college.
Mhm.
So for me, I don't have a reason to think that he can't continue to make that work. Not to the same level, like you said, he just doesn't work that way with any player really, but I think his floor as an edge rusher is why it's really intriguing for me because we've
Mhm.
needed this player, that third edge who can do a little bit of everything, can maybe drop
Yeah.
in coverage for you a little bit because we know they love to do that for whatever reason, and he can do some of that stuff. He actually has the athletic traits to do that, opposed to some of the other guys who've asked to do that in the past. And again, I
Mhm.
think his floor as a solid, especially edge three, but even potentially, I think as a solid edge two. Taking him where they took him in the fourth round, I would have been comfortable with him from about mid third round on kind of like,
Okay.
and that's because I think that you get a player who I'm going to be very surprised if he isn't a quality NFL player. You may not
Mhm.
get you're not going to get an edge one, probably not even a really like a true edge two, at least a guy that you're comfortable with at edge two, but he's not going to have to be that, especially this year. Him as the third edge in this team makes so much sense because he's very smart. Like I said, he can do a little bit of everything for you, and it doesn't allow you to, it allows you to give those guys a break. Highsmith needs a
Mhm.
Watt's going to need breaks. You can throw him out there, and he's going to be able to affect the quarterback in one way or another, opposed to a Malik Reed or some of the other guys we've had come through that position as the third edge the past few years. Is it going to be a guy that you sit there and go, oh man, he was a huge steal? Probably not, because his production probably just won't scream that. But I think if you watch him
Mhm.
play, you're going to see the value that he brings. And I'm hoping they keep him an edge because again, I think he could play linebacker, true off ball. but that's a transition that he would have to take some time to do. And I don't think that he'd be a better fit there than some of the other guys they already have, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I do. Did you give a grade for that pick,
For me,
Shane?
it's an A because I had him in
Okay.
the third round, like firmly in the third round. So getting him outside the third round, I have that as a
Okay.
value. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got an A as well, and I agree with you there. I would have. I think the fourth round is at the end of the day probably where he should have gone.
It's safer.
But I'm very optimistic that he can outplay his draft status.
I think so too.
My biggest concern is when you take a guy who's 6'2", I think bulked up to 240. I heard that he was playing at 229. Even
I believe he will. I think he was in the 230 range in college this past year. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you get a guy who is 6'2", kind of a maxed out frame at this point, I would say at 240 with 31 and a quarter inch arms, you were just talking about like a 2 to 3 percentile size wise when you compare him to true edge players in the NFL. Now, I hope the Steelers can get creative with him, Shane. I hope that they can use him in some sort of hybrid role, rush him up the middle, rush him off the edge in that wide 9 on third down, which I think he's wonderful at that. If they can do that, and if Terrell Austin can find the niche for him and to carve out that the right role for him, I think that he could be an outstanding pick for the Steelers. What I'd worry about a little bit with Herbig is just if you just try to plug him in there and say, you are a base edge and this is the role that you're going to play. I've seen how it's failed in the past. Now, he's not Sutton Smith. He's a way better player and he's significantly bigger than Sutton Smith was. But I wanted to pull my hair out when the Steelers viewed Sutton Smith as an edge player in the NFL because Sutton Smith was tiny. He was 6 foot, 228 or something that way. With 1 percentile arm length, and you just knew that it was not going to work out for him. So when you try to pigeon him into a role, I don't think that Herbig's going to have the same problem. I think he's just a better football player, and he still will win on occasion, even if they do just say that this is your role, this is what you're doing. I just think that, man, if you're willing to get creative with him, my super high end comp for him is like a Nick Bonito type, where you can kind of move him around the defense and just have him blitz, just have him get after the quarterback. And I'm optimistic about what he can bring there. Obviously the production is great. You're talking about a 21-year-old kid here coming from a great football program that produces defensive talent. So he's not TJ Watt. Maybe he's the bite-sized version of that player as a prospect, but his film is still impressive. And so definitely pleased with the pick here.
I think the thing that really kind of brings it all around for me is the fact that when you watch him in college, the way he won is how he's going to win in the NFL. He did not win with putting long arm moves on guys and using power. Like he didn't just beat up on lower competition, right, in college. Like he won in the same ways that he's going to have to be able to win in the NFL. A lot of inside counters, threatening the edge with speed, coming back inside. Like there's going to be some tackles that we play this year that straight up cannot stay with him in space. Like that's just what's going to happen. And I think that that's really valuable right off the bat, but then you hope he can develop other things as well, like you said. But this is just a high floor pick for me. I'm pretty confident he can come in and be a third edge right away. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not sure if there's anybody that didn't have him as a value pick at pick 132 on their draft
people
board.
did not. Even if you thought of him as a transition off ball, like there's like that traits are there. So they like.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And I think it might've been Daniel Jeremiah had him like 77. And so you're getting like twice the value here. He kind of reminds me when he rushes the quarterback, he kind of reminds me of another player that you like, slightly different position, but you really like Drew Sanders. And I see a lot of similarities in terms of a pass rusher with the inside counters. And you're Sanders, the guy that didn't have long arms or anything that way, but you're going to win with your quickness off the snap and your ability to kind of just win with the inside counters, the dip around the edge. Herbig's going to get some wins for sure with that. And again, I think it's an instant upgrade over what they had. You and I both were not the biggest.
Yeah, we've been harping on it for a while. Yeah.
Yeah, so definitely an upgrade there. I have very little doubt that this is going to be a guy that makes team, carves out a role on special teams right away, and maybe gets in that defensive rotation. So let's talk about Corey Trice here. If Darnell Washington wasn't the best value pick in the draft, which I think he was, and I think most would agree that he probably is, then Corey Trice has got to be a close second. My goodness, this is a player that I loved. It's a guy that I thought we could see go in the third round, even with his medical history, because the talent is just so insane. So, Shane, have you watched any of Corey Trice yet? And what are your thoughts on him? What kind of grade did you give him?
Yeah, so I actually had him, I believe, and I'm pulling it up at corner 10 in this draft.
Okay.
So very much was not the 10th cornerback drafted, but I that is a lot to do with his medicals. He did have a lot of injury issues in college, and apparently even now, like he has some hamstring stuff going on or something like that. I forget if it's hamstring or quad or whatever. But I think a healthy Corey Trice. This is a 6'3", fantastic athlete at corner who I think could
Mhm.
even play safety if he really needed to. Like there's a lot of versatility with him, I think, just because you look at his body type, you can move him around the defense a little bit. He could play maybe some of that star role where you kind of have him as like a slot overhang defender type. Like he can do a lot of things because of his build, but I think he could hold up outside for sure at corner as well, just because of that size as well in a scheme like what we do. If he's healthy, I wouldn't be surprised if he gets on the field at some point this year at outside corner for us, because the depth there is just not great. You got Porter. We assume he's gonna be a starter. Yeah, it's tough
Mhm.
with Patrick Peterson because like I don't really know what his role 100% is going to be, because it's been talked about, like, is he going to play a little bit of safety? Maybe is he going to play like he could play all over the place. Levo Wallace, he had a solid year first overall, took the ball away a lot, but he's not going to hold back a young
Mhm.
player that's proving he can get on the field. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see Trice kind of come in here if he's healthy and actually make some noise as a 7th round pick. And definitely shouldn't have been a 7th round. I think I had a 3rd round on him ultimately.
Yeah.
Factoring in, like, I did know about the injury concerns, so maybe knocked him a little bit for that, but the team obviously had some more issues with his injuries than a lot of other people did.
Yeah, Trice is coming off of a 13-game season, and so I would have thought the injury history is kind of in the past at this
A
point.
little bit,
However,
yeah,
4 seasons cut short with injuries. I still had him as a 2-3 grade. I had him as my
right.
58th overall player. I loved the film. I loved the traits. Pro Football Focus had him at 77. If you're
Yes,
talking about a guy the Steelers got at pick 241, the value
yeah.
is just insane there. And
Yeah,
I can't believe that they were able to get him. Now, obviously, if he's a guy that proves to be just one of those players that's constantly banged up, can't get through training camp healthy, and that happens for a couple of years, then he's going to miss his
yeah,
shot.
been fine, yeah.
So he needs to stay healthy. Your opportunities are oftentimes tied to your draft position. So being a 7th-round draft choice, you're not going to get the opportunities that Joey Porter is going to get. I don't care if he outplays Joey Porter in training camp. I very
He's
much
not
doubt.
gonna, yeah.
No, he's not going to supplant him
He doesn't have
on
the
the depth
upside
chart.
either, so, like, it is what it is, but yeah.
Yeah, it's so interesting though, because Trice at 6'3", 207 pounds, tested as a 98th percentile athlete, and his cone and shuttle, all that stuff off the charts. I mean, you don't get guys that move the way he does at that size, and he's got ball production. This guy has 5 interceptions in college. 2 of them came last year. It is worrisome. The injury history is worrisome. He did have an ACL tear. He did have ankle surgery in the past, but like I said, he's coming off of a 13-game season. I think he was playing good football. It's just the injury stuff that brought him down to this point. Otherwise, if had he been healthy throughout his college career, I have no doubt that he would have been a guy that went on day 2, just because
Oh,
the
yeah,
film and
for
the
sure.
talent is so spectacular. And so super optimistic. These are the guys that you take chances on day
Yes,
3.
you do.
The guys that have fallen for injury reasons that still have a ton of upside. Like I said, I think the upside is to be a starting level corner here, and it's not like it's an incredibly high bar to clear. I think it's possible that the Steelers could cut Akella Witherspoon to save $4 million there,
Yes.
even if they keep all those corners on the roster and he's one of the last of that group. I wouldn't expect that Witherspoon or Wallace to play at such a high level that he couldn't see the field. So I think that it's possible, like you said, that he could see the field as a rookie. Now, the issue here, Shane, is that being the late round guy, Trice is probably going to have to play special teams in something that I don't know if he's done a ton of during his college career. And so he'll have to prove himself there. But if it were up to
Yeah,
me, Shane, if I were the one making the call here, I would be like, we know what we have in Wallace. We know what we have in Witherspoon when Witherspoon is healthy. I'm not cutting this guy who has all this talent just because I want a guy that can play special teams. If that's the case, I'll cut one of my other corners and I'll keep James Pierre to play special teams. If that's what it
yes.
comes down to, I'm keeping this guy in the roster, and I would expect him to be impressive because throughout training camp and preseason, because that's what we saw in his college film. I think he's a guy that deserved to go much higher in the draft, assuming that he stays healthy. I
If
love
he's
this pick.
healthy, he's no worse than corner 4 on this roster if he's healthy, because I think Witherspoon at this point, again, we kind of he's a flash in the pan type of player. Like he will have his moments, but the consistency has never been there throughout his career. He's not getting any younger. I don't think you can justify, like, especially like you said, if it comes down to keeping Trice, if he's healthy and playing well during the preseason, during training camp, and you want a special teamer, yeah, one of my opinion, Witherspoon, just because of the consistency issues, you can go, right? Like you can go find another team to play for. We'll keep him on the roster. It can be him, Wallace, Porter, Peterson, and then your combination of probably hopefully not. They brought in Shannon Sullivan. I don't really know how I feel about that. But some combination of him and Pierre, like whatever it is, I would not let this guy off the roster unless he just isn't healthy enough to play.
Yep, I would agree. I mean, I don't think there's any reason to. You give him at least a year. I think the Steelers have kind of made a bad habit in recent years of giving up on guys too early.
Quincy Roche
in their
back
careers.
on the team.
They go, they go and sign with other teams, and not that they've had great careers elsewhere. I mean, Isaiah Buggs has kind of worked out.
This is true.
So
this is true. Yeah.
So there's been a few guys, but I feel like keep these younger guys, be a little bit more forward thinking, because even if Trice is banged up in his first season, give him another year. Don't cut that rookie contract for pennies that you have.
He's
a 4-year deal.
Guy for 4 years. Like you want to have that.
Yeah. Keep him around, because I'm super intrigued by what he could offer. In my final big board, I slotted him one spot ahead of Keely Ringo. Another guy that, again, Steelers fans were down on, but at the end of the day, I thought people even thought that Ringo was a good value pick in the 4th round. Well, Steelers got Trice in the 7th round. So
right. Yeah.
So definitely high on that selection there. And let's talk about the last pick here. Offensive lineman Spencer Anderson out of Maryland. Didn't know much about Spencer Anderson. To be honest, when they drafted him, he was the 316th player on Pro Football Focus's board. So if there was a reach in the draft, it was definitely Spencer Anderson. I think a lot of people viewed him more as the priority free agent type. But again, at this point in the draft, pick 251, you're a handful of picks away from the draft being over with. You are looking for guys who can make your roster. And I think that Anderson has a chance to be that guy. I view him as the center prospect that they were looking for. I think his build fits best for their short arm guy. He's kind of played up and down the line at Maryland, but I think that that's where they should try him out at. Steelers lost J.C. Hassenauer to the Giants this offseason. And so you had one player at center, Mason Cole. Obviously, they gave up on the Kendrick Green experiment, which that didn't last very long. I told you if they moved him to guard, he was going to fail, and he did. Green will be bumped off the roster this year, I have no doubt.
Yeah.
But what are your thoughts on Spencer Anderson? Have you got a chance to watch any of his tape yet, or what do you think of him?
I didn't get a chance to watch him, but again, it's a pick you make at the end of the 7th round with the hope that he can make the roster, and he's got the position flexibility, right? Like this is a guy you take because he's played a lot of positions. You hope that one of those positions he's NFL caliber. Probably would be center, like you said, Tommy. I think that makes the most sense. It's the biggest hole in the roster, at least in terms of backup players right now. Because technically, Nate, who again we should talk about the brother connection. The Steelers love their brothers. I mean, my nickname for this team this year is the family reunion. That's what I'm calling it.
There we go.
Like it doesn't matter what they do.
Family ties, whatever.
Whatever it is. That's what their nickname is. But you get a guy that, like you said, can play multiple positions. You hope that one of those works out. And if he makes a roster as a 7th round pick this late, awesome. If he doesn't, he's probably a practice squad candidate, and you kind of move on from there. The only thing that I am a little bit surprised about, and I want to talk about this before we get into the last part here where we do some other things, but not drafting a quarterback late. Now, granted, they didn't have enough late round picks to do it probably, but I'm not. We talked about Tanner Morgan. I watched a lot of that man play football Minnesota as a Big Ten and Wisconsin fan in general. He is experienced is the best word I have for him. So that tells you where I think. So I don't know if he's the 3rd quarterback. So I'm curious what they do there. So, but.
Yeah, Tanner Morgan feels so much like a camp body to me. Like doesn't have size, doesn't have the athleticism, doesn't have the arm, nothing that you want really.
He's just
I kind of agree with you there. And in my final mock, Shane, I had the Steelers grabbing a quarterback with their last pick just because I'm like, again, for the same reasons I already alluded to, you look for guys that can make the roster at this point. The Steelers have Pickett and Trubisky under contract.
Yeah.
A quarterback could make the roster. The Steelers can carry 3. They have the new rule where the 3rd does not count against.
Yeah.
Yes, it doesn't count against you. You're an active spot there on game day. And so I was a little bit surprised, honestly, they didn't go that route just to get the 4-year cheap option there potentially. When it comes back to with Spencer Anderson, though, I do think, we're talking about a guy that size, athletic profile, very similar like a Marquise Pouncey, just not nearly as good, obviously, coming out of school. Did test a lot better than Pouncey for what it's worth. Tested as a 93.7 percentile athlete.
He's a good
Rosin, if I remember.
For sure.
So you throw a dart at the dartboard, you see if it sticks. I think that's what you do here with Spencer Anderson. You get him at a position. And I did not love this center group at all. Like I think the talent, after the John Michael Schmitz, Tippmann, the talent really dropped off there. And so if you weren't
Yeah.
going to get one of those guys, I'm fine with taking a guy with maybe it potentially has some upside because of the quality, size, good athletic traits for the
Yeah.
position. We'll see if he sticks. He might just be a bad football player. And if that's the case, then
Oh
he's a
well.
guy that you have through the
Yeah.
summer and you try again. But I'm fine with taking a guy with some athletic traits here with the last pick in the draft. I give that one a C, Shane, just because there were other
Yeah.
positions and players that I still liked who went undrafted that I probably would have spent the pick on instead.
That's
But again,
fair.
if he's a
Yeah.
guy that makes the roster, then I would give that grade a bump way up from there. All right, if you are a fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers and you would like to support the Steel Curtain podcast, please consider subscribing to the Steel Curtain podcast on YouTube. We appreciate all of your support. And if you have a question for us, if you are here
Yes.
live with us now, please drop it in the chat. Shane and I would love to answer your Steelers questions about the draft, roster, anything else that you have for us here. All right,
Absolutely.
Shane, let's go work because we spent so much time on that topic. Let's run through these real quickly here. We're going to do our second topic here. What Steelers draft results mean for the team in 2023? We're going to shoot out some winners and losers real quick. We're going to talk about a few projected roles, and we'll see what we have time for here as we're running a little bit late in this podcast. So, Shane, winners for the Steelers in this draft. Which players on the team benefited from the Steelers draft results?
I mean, I think the first two you got to talk about is Kenny Pickett and Najee Harris, right? Like
Yeah.
getting Broderick Jones in there as an offensive tackle prospect, even if he maybe isn't an elite player in year one, I think he's going to be in this window that they're trying to build, and it's going to help the run game, especially. I think he's going to be a really good run blocker day one if he does start, and we'll talk about that in a little bit too. But if he gets on the field, I think he's going to be really good in the run game right away. He has the athleticism for it. He has a lot of good tape there. Pass protection might be a little bit iffy, but again, most rookie tackles are. I mean, you look at Andrew Thomas, a teammate of his from Georgia, really rough rookie year. Now one of the maybe 5 to 10 best tackles in the sport, right? It just kind of sometimes it takes a little bit of time there, but you love that for them. And then Darnell Washington, like especially for Najee Harris, like maybe Kenny Pickett a little bit in the passing game, but and even pass protection, but Washington really changes the numbers in the run game, unlike most tight ends in the NFL. Like he really does. And get him on the move on some outside runs and let him run Najee behind him. Good luck trying to get around him and getting to Najee. Like this run game has potential, and that's one thing, and we'll talk about this too. That because Ken is sticking around, I do have concerns about the passing game pretty much no matter what. Like they could have signed 7 receivers that I love. That wouldn't have really changed my outlook on that. But the running game, the one thing that has been okay at times with under his tenure has been the run game, especially back half of last year. I think that they have a potential to really actually have a truly elite run game this year with the guys that they brought in. So I'd say those two are the biggest winners.
Okay. I've got Mason Cole as one of my winners. And I think because the Steelers were looking at least at addressing the center position that early on, like potentially with like pick 32, maybe they were thinking more 49-ish all along because they brought in guys like Steve Avila, John Michael Schmitz, Osiris Torrance, who would have been a guard. And at that point, if they would have drafted him, I'm sure maybe a James Daniel move, something like that.
Center,
Cody Mock. They brought in a bunch of guys who were center capable. And I think that could have potentially, as early as year one, knocked Mason Cole out a starting job. So I have him as one of the winners this year. Gets to keep his job. For the same reason, on the other side of the ball, Landon Roberts and even Mark Robinson, the Steelers did not draft an off-ball linebacker this year, and not unless they're viewing Herbig that way, and it doesn't seem like they are. So those guys are going to be able to carve out a role for the Steelers this year, unless they add somebody else in free agency, which seems unlikely at this point. So those guys will get a chance to prove what they can do in Pittsburgh, and Robinson especially, who, again, being a late round guy himself, he could have been a guy that's kind of on the outs or only maybe like the Marcus Allen career path, if you will, had the Steelers have drafted a Trenton Simpson or something like that. But as it stands right now, he's going to be at least one of the top 3 linebackers on that team, and he's going to have a chance to show what he can do this year. Losers from the Steelers draft, Shane, who do you have as the losers from the Steelers roster this year?
So the two guys that stand out to me, Dan Moore Jr., right? Left tackle incumbent.
Yep.
I still think there's a shot that he does have a chance to keep his job early on. We'll talk about that with the next part here, but he definitely is not the long-term answer there now, and I don't think he really ever was, but this kind of confirms it. So tough for him a little bit. He's done well for his draft spot for sure, but this is something we thought would happen and we thought should happen. And then Kelly Weatherspoon, we talked about a little bit earlier. Like, I think he's the guy that is the most likely to maybe not have a job on this team come the end of
Mhm.
training camp once cuts comes, because if Trice is healthy and Porter Jr. obviously looks ready to go, like I don't know where he fits, right? I don't think he doesn't add special teams
Yeah.
value. He's going to be your fourth or fifth corner at that point. Like he could be a guy that after that real spark plug kind of season he had for us might be off the roster after a rough 2022.
Yeah, those are the ones that I was going to go with too, because, and for obvious reasons. I mean, Dan Moore is at some point this season, if not right away. I kind of think it's going to be right away.
Yes.
You draft a guy 14th overall, but at some point he's going to be out of a job. It comes down to that point, whether or not the Steelers will give him a fair opportunity to compete for the right tackle position, something that he's never really done before. I don't really see him beating out a core four for that, because
probably not.
Core four is just more experienced and they're going to want that. But that it's not great for his career path. I think that he's kind of destined just to be that swing tackle for the remainder of his career. And then you alluded to Ahkello Witherspoon. I'll even say Levi Wallace as well. I think
those
both
two
guys
in general. Yeah.
And certainly Witherspoon, because I think he's a guy that the Steelers may potentially view as expendable at this point, because you drafted not one, but two corners. You doubled up. And not only did you double on the position, you didn't draft a nickel corner. You drafted two long, big outside corners who have a very similar size profile to Witherspoon. But if these guys can stay healthier than he can, there's no reason not to save yourself $4 million, especially if you think that those guys are going to get more playing time. So
yeah,
I liked your choices there. And then one more I'll throw out there as well is Zach Gentry. Steelers went and just before the draft, they signed Gentry. I don't think Gentry is a horrible player. I think he's very unspectacular in his role, but he was a big Y tight end who helped them in the run game. It's unfortunate for him now. I don't know if there's a path for the roster. I think we'll do a roster prediction here at some point, maybe next week. But I do think that if the Steelers decide to say, hey, we're gonna kind of label Connor Hayward as our fullback and we're gonna keep four tight ends and no fullback, maybe there's a path for him there. Other than that, though, his role, if he does stick around, he might not get a hat and his role will be very diminished.
We do have a chat here from our buddy Andrew here. Do you both think Herbert can stay at edge, or will length force him to the inside? I still personally think he can play edge, especially third edge. If you want him to be your primary edge too, I think that could come with some concerns long term. But initially, I want him to work at edge because his tape is really good there. He showed as a smaller player that he could win with, like we said, inside counters, threatening the edge with speed. Like, if he fails at edge, I do think he can drop back and kind of play more of an off-ball role, and maybe as a blitzing backer and a guy that can kind of handle flat, like zone coverage rules, things like that. But I do think his tape at edge tells me that he can hold up in the NFL enough to stay there early on, at least.
Okay, and yeah, I'm not quite as confident as Shane is. I want him to be what I want Terrell Austin to do is for him to be an inside-out guy. Play like a buck roll where you come downhill, and then in passing situations specifically, then you can be that overhang defender in blitz the quarterback and rush the quarterback. So I do think that I think he's going to stick just because he's going to be, at the very least, he's going to be good at special teams. I think he's just a very natural football player. I don't think he's a guy that's going to hold up at the edge position full time, but I am excited for what he could potentially offer. It's just interesting to see what the ultimate plan will be there. All right, what do we got here, Shane? Let's project the roles real quick for the Steelers here. We'll run through all these picks. So we'll start with Broderick Jones. When do you think we can expect him to be a starter? Because both you and I say that he'll be a starter at some point.
I think within the first few weeks of the season, if not right away. I think training camp is going to be a big factor here. I think if he shows that he can hold up in pass protection against the guys on the roster that he's going to get to go against a little bit here in camp, and if he looks good, looks prepared, he's not overwhelmed, I don't see any reason to keep him off the field. This guy was a 14th pick in the draft this year. He has all the athletic traits. We already talked about that, raved on that. If he looks ready, he has to play. Dan Moore, as much as I give him a lot of credit for starting the last couple of years and making good on the 4th round pick, he is a swing tackle.
Yeah.
That's what his best role is. And I think if he stays in that role, I think he'll have a long career in the NFL, maybe for us, maybe for other teams. But we need to let the more talented player play unless he's truly just not ready. And I don't think he's that raw that you can't ask him to play and not get killed. You know, maybe he won't be much better than Dan in pass protection as a rookie, but he's going to be better in the run game. He's going to be more athletic. He can do more things with them. I just don't see him staying off the field long.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and predict that he starts from day one. You go from 17 to 14. And you're getting a guy that's just going to look more talented. When you watch them, the two of them next to
Yeah,
each other every day in practice, he's just going to
it's
look more talented.
yeah,
Now, the one thing that could potentially hold him back is if he's just not getting the mechanics down, and if he's looking really sloppy. Then
right.
I think kind of worst case scenario, Shane, though, it's kind of like a Kenny Pickett situation. It's like, all right, I tried this for a couple of games. You're going in there by week 3. And I
Yeah,
think that's what
you
it's
just
going
got
to,
to go do it. Yeah, because the guy's not getting it.
yeah.
You got to go do it.
Yeah,
So.
if it's not right away, it'll be early in the season for him, and he's going to find his way on there. Joey Porter Jr. Do you think he's a day one starter for the Steelers, or do you think that maybe they run with a guy like a Levi Wallace out there first, and then kind of transition him in slowly?
I think all comes down kind of the similar thing with Broderick is, does he look the part in camp, and does he look ready
Mhm.
to go out there and not get, pretty much out talented, right? Because he has all the talent in the world, he has all the traits. If he's ready to play, and I think he's gonna have a role no matter what as a press man guy. Like, if you need someone to come in and just stick a big receiver at the line, that's who's gonna come in and do that. It's how much is he actually going to play in terms of total snaps. Like, if he's the true, number 1 or number 2 outside corner, depending on how they use, Pat Pete and stuff like that, I think that he could do that right away. I think he has the talent level to do that. But in camp, they're gonna know quickly if he's ready to go. Like, if he looks the part,
Mhm.
especially against like a guy like George Pickens, those battles are going to be legendary in camp. I can already tell you that. George is going to get frustrated. He's like, how is he able to touch me? I'm 10 yards from him. Like, it's going to be so fun. Like, those two are going to have some battles. If he looks the part against him, especially with what he did against physical corners last year, I think you can slot him in and let him play outside right away.
Yeah, I'm so excited for those camp battles. Can't
Yeah,
wait to go
could be
watch that in
that one
Latrobe this year.
specifically is going to be so fun.
Absolutely. I kind of view Porter as a guy who I think he's going to start in a part-time role. If I had to guess right now,
Like I said, yeah,
I want him to be a full-time player right from the gate. I think he's going to be that guy that he's always going to be the outside corner and nickel.
yes,
And it's obviously he's only going to play outside. He's not moving. You're not moving Porter to the slot at all. But I
no,
do
there's no
think that
reason.
there's a chance that the Steelers might feel more comfortable, maybe with Wallace out there in some of their base packages. Maybe I don't know though. And it's interesting to see. It's a lot of it's going to come down to training camp. And like you said, if he
Yeah,
looks like he's ready, he'll like Broderick will be the day one starter there too. And once he's in that role, you're not moving him from that. He's going to play
no.
every snap for the Steelers. Keanu Benton, how do you see him fitting in the defensive line rotation?
See, I think he's going to be probably the primary nose tackle by the time camp breaks. I think he's just better
Yeah.
than what they have. And that's
Mhm.
not saying a whole lot, unfortunately. But I do think he's going to have that role. And I do think he's going to have some pass rush snaps. I think he's going to be on the field on third down sometimes, especially if maybe Ogunjobi's not, producing as much as you hope after his contract. If you want to give Cam Hayward a breather, the guy needs one, for goodness. I mean, he plays so hard all the
Yeah.
time. Like, you want to be able to give him a breather. I think his best role, ironically, it's probably not the role he plays the most snaps at, but I think as a pass rusher against some of the offensive linemen he's going to face inside, he's just going to be better than some of them. Like, and even you
Mhm.
saw at the Senior Bowl, like, he was dusting some of the guys at the Senior Bowl. Like, it was pretty gross to watch a lot of the time. He can be that guy, I think, year one. I don't think he's going to play any more than maybe 40% of the snaps year one, if I
Yeah.
had to guess. But those 40% of the snaps are probably, in my opinion, going to look very, very promising.
Yeah, I think that's a great estimate, and I like your assessment of him. I'm interested to see what he's going to do. I think that there's a lot of versatility to be had there, and like you said, it's competition's not very stiff right there
It's not
at
bad.
nose tackle, regardless of you adding Fajoku and Armon Watts, and
Yeah,
I
they're
just feel like
just yeah.
those are just guys, and I think that Benton could obviously surpass those guys and look like the better player in camp. I'm interested to see. I want to watch him. He's one of the most interesting players I think this
Yes,
year because I want to watch him up and down the line and see where that best role is. I want to see him in the three tech
I
position,
do.
honestly,
Me
because
too. Yeah.
I think he's got the fluidity and ability to knife in the backfield and make some plays happen there. So it sounds like Steelers will plug him in there at nose tackle. And I agree with you. Probably the 45-ish% range. Give Hayward a few breaks there if you could. I think there's a chance that Benton from his rookie season could play more snaps than Leal. It just depends on
I think
the
so.
fit.
Just
And
how they use him. Yeah, how they use those two too will be interesting. So we'll see.
yeah,
But
I'm very interested to see how that defensive line rotation works out here. Darnell Washington, what are your thoughts for him as a rookie?
designated go find somebody and kill them, probably is what his role is going to be. No, but actually though, I think for the most part he's going to play obviously in 12 personnel. I think we're going to run a lot of that this year. I think they wouldn't have drafted him even as high as 93 if they didn't expect him to be able to do that year one.
Yeah.
I think that he will be a red zone target for sure. I think on third downs where you need to have it, I think him and Pat are probably going to be the two guys to get the ball the most, especially in shorter passes or shorter downs where you don't have to get the ball down the field to get a first down. Those two will be very hard to cover just because, again, Pat's just a great player and Darnell's just bigger than everybody on the field pretty much at any given time. So I think he'll have his role in the passing game. It's mostly going to be go out in space, especially on some counters and things like that, get down the field and just hurt people. That's what they're going to ask him to do.
Yeah, I've never been more excited for 12 personnel, 22 personnel in my life. I feel like you now have that perfect 1-2 punch at tight end. And so I'm really interested to see what happens there. I think he might play more than expected, even Shane.
It just depends on how much 12 personnel, I think, too. Like, if we run a lot of it, he will be on the field.
Well, and considering his draft position, and you got to consider, too, that Freiermuth wasn't really a full-time player for the
No,
Steelers.
not really. Yeah.
So the combination of the two, those guys are going to play a lot of snaps together. I think that they will end up running a lot of that formation this year because they're going to find that we're just the most successful running the football out of that.
You can throw out of that with those two. I mean, there's no reason you can't still.
Oh yeah, for sure.
That's part of the problem with I think a lot of teams that run 12 personnel kind of is a tell more than even it would suggest.
Run true play action now.
With them, it's like you can't assume that because if you let him leak out as a tight end down the field, it's over for you. Too bad. Try again next time.
Get him going down the seam. I agree.
Yeah, but we do have a chat here real quick I want to throw up. We have, do you think that Broderick Jones will be the savior of our O-line, or will be looking at free agency additions? So they already did such a good job in free agency of building the interior. I don't think we see any more actual additions that mean anything at the offensive line.
Yeah.
Tackle is still obviously not great, but you have three guys that with two guys who have a bunch of starting experience and one guy that you think can start in Jones. So I think that they're good as far as offensive line additions at this point.
Yeah, I mean, they've had 4 free agent signings over the last 2 years. They just spent the 14th pick on a tackle, and the 6th offensive lineman in Darnell. So I think they're done as well. We'll see. I mean, this could obviously change, but by next year, they could be targeting a center in the first round or a right tackle in the first round. So it wouldn't surprise me, but I do think that for now they are done. Let's see.
Nick Herbig up here. Yeah.
Oh yeah, we're at Herbig. There we go. What kind of role do you feel that Herbig? Do you think he's going to play like the Malik Reed role for the Steelers then?
I think he has to, right? Like, there's no one else on the roster that I'm comfortable giving that role to right now. I think they drafted him for a reason at that pick. It wasn't just because he was the best player on the board. I think they see a guy who can come in and do the third edge stuff for them and give those guys a break. And again, maybe you will see him play a little bit of that off-ball stuff. You'll see him probably cover. I can already guarantee you there will be multiple snaps this year where he covers a receiver. I don't think that's smart.
Yeah.
But we know that the Steelers do this. So, like, it'll probably be him. And at least if it's him, I'm like, okay, I get that more than some of the other guys who've had to do that in the past. But, like, I'm not going to be surprised if he has a decent amount of coverage snaps for an edge player when he's in there. I think he's going to have plenty of true, pass rush plays as well. But I'd be surprised if he plays more than, like, 30% of the snaps, and that's just based on how much of a break they want to give the two starters and injuries and stuff like that. If one of those guys goes down, I think he could be at least early on given the chance to prove he can be a starter slot in for one of those guys with injury before they make a move or anything like that. So
yeah, I think the edge position is still one guy short, Shane.
It is.
Honestly.
Realistically, yeah. You want another
ideally,
because
I would love to be able to have Herbig start as like the edge 4 there, and the Steelers only keep 4, but the guy that can play special teams and let him prove himself on defense, and then have like a bigger base edge guy that can take some of the run stopping stuff so that Watt and Highsmith don't have to get as beat up, and they're fresh to tee off on the passer. I think the Steelers are one man short, but because Herbig probably will be that third guy, I can't really see him maybe losing out to the guys behind him because there's just no depth there at all. So I do think he could have a solid role from the gate where he kind of acts as in a rotation and plays a ton of special team snaps. Corey Trice, what are your thoughts on him? First of all, do you predict that Trice will make the roster? Secondly, because we got to say that he's a 7th round pick. And secondly, if he does, what's his role going to be in 2023?
I do think he makes the roster, especially if he's healthy. And if he's not healthy enough to play, he probably just goes in IR and he stays on the roster technically anyway, right? I don't think this is a cut candidate guy for sure. I don't think he goes to a practice squad either, especially if he's healthy. Some team will take him. That is guaranteed, pretty much. Like, it's just
Yeah.
you don't want to risk that. And I think they can protect a certain amount of players now, but like I don't think if he makes a team, it's because he truly makes the team. I think that he's the fourth most talented corner on the roster right now. It just can he actually stay healthy and show that in camp. I think he's going to be given the opportunity to do so. They drafted him. They took a flyer on him for a reason because they knew the value was there. I think they want him to prove that he could stay on the roster and have a role. If he makes the roster first, and then also they let go of one of Witherspoon or Wallace, one of those guys, he could get some snaps in this team. Like they like to roll different corners out, and they like to give guys breaks. Like, I think he could easily find himself a role, and he might have a varied role, honestly. Like, his body type screams a guy that could do a lot of different things. He didn't in college. Like, I don't know if he'll be ready to do that, but I could see them viewing him as kind of a do-it-all defensive back at some point down the road.
Yeah, I could too. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if they tried him out at a few different things because the size and athletic combination is so good. And I feel like he's got just good instincts, good fluidity.
He does,
yeah. Yes, I predicted that he's going to make the team. And obviously this is barring some major injuries early on that could potentially derail that. But if that happens, then they'll probably stash him on IR, even if he just has some bumps and bruises, because you can do that and then bring him back the following year. So yeah, I do think he's going to make the team. The role is so hard to predict at this point because, again, you're talking about the 241st pick in the draft. So
yeah.
I'm going to be very cautious with predicting his role. I think it's going to be primarily a special teams guy. When he gets the hat, I think he'll be a special teams guy who maybe in the second half of the year can carve out something with the Steelers, even if it's a smaller role. And Spencer Anderson, do you think that he makes the team? And if so, obviously just a backup, right?
Yeah, I don't think I can confidently say he's going to make the team because of how much interior offensive line depth we have. Because you can look at it and say, yeah, well, we don't have a true backup center. If Cole goes down, James Daniels playing center and someone else is playing guard. Like, that's what's going to happen realistically. Like, even if Anderson makes the roster, I don't think he comes in to play center when you have James Daniels to play center if you need him to, right? So that's kind of my thing with it. Is I think if we truly had like nobody who had any center versatility, his chance to make the roster would be much higher. But we do have that ability to do that if we need to. So for me, he faces an uphill. It's going to be tough for him to make it.
Yeah, I'm predicting that he gets cut as well, signed to the practice squad, a guy that maybe gets moved up in the event of injuries. Steelers are the most fortunate team in the NFL last year in terms of offensive line injuries. Hope that it can stay that way again now that especially your offensive line should be on paper at least more talented than it was before. But under the rarest circumstances, does a guy like Spencer Anderson see the field next season? Maybe a guy that kind of sticks around over the next couple of years, and we'll see how that develops from there. Let's talk about the undrafted free agents real quick. Let's skip to the undrafted free agents. We named them at the beginning of the podcast here. Of the guys that are on that list, that short list that the Steelers brought in, do you see any of them making the roster, potentially cracking that final 53?
I think the one you have to look at that has the most potential, and it's mostly not just because he had a really good productive college career, but because he's at a position that we really desperately still need depth at. You look at David Perales out of Fresno State, very, very productive edge player in college. And there's a reason he's undrafted, right? You know, he's not the best athlete in the world or anything like that, but we need edge depth, right? So he's going to be able to compete. I think they brought him in because the production was so good. They want to see if he can replicate that in camp and look the part. I think there's not really that low of a chance that he makes the roster if he shows that he can be better depth than some of the guys that we have right now.
Yeah, I think that's extremely reasonable. Obviously, it would be hard to have both of your backup edge players have zero NFL experience, but I can see it because the path is clear there where there's just no depth at the position. I can see that.
Yeah.
The other one that I would say, Shane, is Monty Pottenbaum, the fullback. If Steelers want a true fullback, obviously Derek Watson on the roster at this point in time. Now, like I said, the Steelers could kind of flirt with the idea of saying, well, we'll use Connor Hayward as the H-back role, throw him in some fullback snaps there. That way we can keep Zach Gentry. The Steelers could go that route. Yeah. If they want like that true, like bruising fullback, they really want to get scary.
Yeah, this guy's
22 personnel.
That's that guy.
Yeah, he's going to be that guy. So I do think there's a route for him to make the roster if the Steelers are eyeing that. We want that true fullback because we are so dead set that we're going to run the ball 40, 42 times a game this year. He definitely fits the bill there, and there's not any competition to be had outside of Hayward, depending on how they view his role, either as a true tight end, an H-back type, whatever, but he would be better as the lead blocker type.
For sure. Yeah.
All right, let's go to Shane. Before we sign off here, fill in the blank for me. This is the best Steelers draft since blank. So what year would you put on that? And kind of just on paper, not exactly how these drafts have turned out, but your initial thoughts, at least watching your draft, saying, I love this draft. I think it's the best since when?
I think for me, you look at the value they got in 2017, right? And I know it's pretty recent. You get TJ Watt at the end of the first round. Hilarious. Like, as a guy who watched Wisconsin, I'm like, honestly, you could have definitely name scouted this guy. Like, frankly, like you could have just been like, yeah, it's JJ's brother and he plays edge. Yeah, he's probably good. Like, I mean, obviously that's lazy, but I think you could have gotten away with it, and obviously you could have. I really liked the Juju pick at the time because I felt we didn't have that type of player as well. So, like, I really liked the value at the top of the draft there. The rest of the draft, not quite as much at the time, especially. But I still think those two were two of the more solid first two picks we had made in a long time at that point. I know that you have a different answer here, and there's a draft earlier, even back in 2007, when they got Timmons, Worlds, those guys, William Gay at the end of the sixth. Like that was one of their better value classes too, for sure. So one of those two, I would say.
Yeah, it's hard because I've been scouting, like thoroughly scouting since like 2013, but I think that this class is better than on paper. I think this is better, especially the value picks they were received than any of those. So I would go back to 2010. This was before I was doing this super in depth, but I remember still being very involved in the draft, watching it every single year and knowing a lot of these players and be like, man, I love the Marquise Pouncey pick. The Steelers doubled up on wide receiver. They got Emmanuel Sanders, the Antonio Brown. Obviously, it turned out to be a historic draft class for the Steelers because you got two multi-time All-Pro players from that. Sanders went in to have a great career, wasn't as great with the Steelers. But I even liked like the Jonathan Dwyer pick and some of the other value picks that they ended up getting that class. I'm using my cheat sheet over here because I don't remember every selection they had. Thaddeus Gibson, I thought I liked him at the time. And Jason Worlds, I was optimistic about, a guy who was all right for the Steelers. I think I honestly think it probably tops that still. And so I don't want to overhype this draft class, but if we're just talking about where I had players valued, Shane, the Steelers got my 12th player, my 15th player, my 19th player. It's unbelievable the talent they got. I think I had Benton at 53. I had Corey Trice at 58. I just don't know how it happened. I really don't. And some of these guys, I had no idea that, like Trice, I had no idea the Steelers were going to draft him. I just really liked him. So obviously injuries can derail this. This could end up being a bad draft class. We don't know until a couple of years down the line. A lot of it depends on health and opportunity. And so these guys stay healthy. They get the opportunity. I think they will prove themselves and that this is going to be a potentially historic draft class for the Steelers. I don't want to count the chickens before they hatch, if you will, but I really, really like it on paper, at least.
And really draft grades. And I want to kind of emphasize this with people is I know some people get mad about it. Like, oh, you can't grade a draft. And I get that, but you have to understand, like, this is not really grading how good we think these players necessarily are going to be for sure. It's about the process that they took to get here, right? The process the Steelers took was absolutely unequivocally correct to get the players that they did. Now, all these players could end up being bad. It's unlikely, obviously, but if all of them are bad, it still was the right moves at the time based on the information that we have and what they had at their disposal. You cannot tell me that taking a tackle with the athletic traits that Broderick Jones has in the top 15 is a bad pick in general. You can't tell me that taking Joey Porter Jr. 32 is a bad pick. It's just all these things you can't say with confidence now that they aren't the right things to do. And you hope that they were ultimately the right moves, and this class can kind of propel us a tier higher than maybe we've been over the past few years.
Yep, absolutely. The philosophy was right. The price was right. The value was right. That's why they're calling Omar Khan the con artist already.
Already the best GM nickname ever, in my opinion. I can't think.
It has to be. Yeah,
it's top 5 of all time.
Yeah,
I don't care.
So now he's setting the bar pretty high. I hope that it goes this way, and I hope that we see some great results from this. So
yeah, for sure.
All right, there's a longer show for us today, but thank you for joining us on the Steel Curtain podcast. You can follow Shane on Twitter at Shayne Kubas. You can follow me on Twitter at Tommy Jaggi. You can download the Steel Curtain podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Also check us out on YouTube. And thanks for listening to the Steel Curtain podcast.